This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You will get exclusive subscriber-only content. For example, most recently, an interview with Itai Ater, professor of economics at Tel Aviv University, who discusses his new study into the radically new patterns of emigration of Israelis out of Israel in the last few years, or an interview with Sina Azodi, professor of Middle East politics at George Washington University, about his book, Iran and the Bomb. Just go to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and look for the big button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. My guest today is a lawyer, a philanthropist and activist, most notably for disability rights. He is also a fellow podcaster, previously the host of All About Change, a podcast dedicated to activism, and now an author as well. His book, Find Your Fight, Make Your Voice Heard for the Causes That Matter Most, has just been published by Greenleaf Book Group Press. Jay Ruderman, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you.
So what made you write this book in the first place? Was it that you've seen so many people with good intentions and a great idea crash and burn?
Well, I think the book, first of all, I think it started out as a memoir. And then I was told, well, memoirs really don't work. So the book is really a how-to guide to become a more effective activist. And it's based on my 20 years of experience. But I also worked in the stories of dozens of other activists and how they went about becoming more effective at what they do.
What is it that people get wrong?
I think people find an issue that they care about. They go to the streets, they speak out, they talk about what's concerning to them, but they're not really effective at getting their point across. I think the basis of the book is, one, going narrow and deep, thinking about what's really important to you, and really knowing the subject matter, becoming sort of an expert on it, and speaking with authority. The other thing is a belief, and mainly the book is written towards Americans, but I believe that most people are good. That's a base concept of the book. And you're appealing to the hearts and minds. We're living in a very divisive time, both politically and socially, where people are at each other. They're at each other because social media plays a large part in that, but also because of how we've developed as a society. So we speak at each other, but we don't effectively work towards change. So this whole book is about how you become more effective at actually creating change. That's why I wrote it.
But people who decide to become an activist already are interested in affecting change, right?
Yes, certainly, but they don't really know how to do it. And there is this belief, I believe today, that divisiveness is what will get your cause across. And it will. You can make noise. And I certainly don't believe that controversy is not part of it, because there's a part of my book that says courting controversy. And why do I say that? Because in order to get your voice heard and to become part of the general conversation, you have to be somewhat controversial. But then you have to pivot. And you have to pivot away from being controversial to working with those that can actually create the change. And that's where people get it wrong. People think, if I'm loud and, I say what I believe and I work with others and we get our point across, often they're not working towards winning over the hearts and minds of their fellow citizens and actually convincing them that what they're advocating for is something important. What they're doing is they're scaring people and they're turning people away. And when you turn people away, you don't really create change, you just create noise and division.
There's really maybe two kinds of causes, I would say. You did mention controversy, but obviously there are the more controversial ones that many people would disagree on, and many people would sign up to happily. And others that are just, I mean, if we take your case, for example, you've been active in promoting disability rights for a very long time. I mean, it's not controversial in any way, is it?
Well, it was controversial in a way when I started, because when I began to get involved in disability rights, disability was handled in society as a problem that needed to be dealt with. So people were put into segregated housing and sheltered workshops, segregated schools, and moved away from general society. And when I got involved in it, my approach, not just my approach, because I worked with the community, but the approach was people with disabilities are people just like all of us, and they deserve to be integrated into society, to live in society, to go to school in general schools, to work in regular jobs, and just to be visible in society. And that was controversial when I started to work at it. It's become more accepted, but it was fairly controversial. And there's a tremendous amount of stigma against people with disabilities. And part of disability is mental health, and we've dealt with that a lot over the decades about stigma. And stigma pays a real price. I mean, any of us who have children who are on social media, who are young and getting involved, the stigma involved at being called out as different, especially for a disability, can be devastating. But even on a bigger level, we have an internal view of what it means to have a disability. And, I sort of fell into Hollywood. I'm a Bostonian. I grew up in Boston. My dad was born there. My grandmother was born there. Our activism and disability started in the Jewish community, first in Boston, then nationally, then internationally. We've done a lot of work in Israel in terms of disability inclusion. But I think that we fell into Hollywood by accident. And why did we fall into Hollywood? Because as an activist foundation, as an activist myself, I was looking at films and TV and seeing how disability was often played by an actor without that disability. And it was going through the time of Oscars so white, and that people deserve to be represented by people that looked like them and who are like them.
So inclusion was all the rage.
Right. And if you go back in history, there was even a time in the beginning of the film industry where African-American characters, Black characters were played by white people. Native American characters were played, by white people. So many different stories. And now we reached a point where if you see a Native American on film, they're usually played by a Native American. If you see a Hispanic person on film, they're played by a Hispanic person. If you see a Black person on film, they're played by a Black person. Disability, it was like, wow, it's great acting. Daniel Day-Lewis playing someone who's disabled, or
Dustin Hoffman,
or, any number of characters. That's great acting. But the point was not that it's not great acting, but there was a whole segment of society, about 20% of American society, who had a disability that was not seen accurately in film. And so we started to call out Hollywood and be like, listen, you're all about diversity. You're all about inclusion. You're getting disability wrong. In fact, I had a conversation with a journalist for the LA Times where he wrote, what are the 100 things that the Hollywood industry can do to make it more inclusive, they left out disability. And so Danny Woodburn, who is a little person, he's an actor, he was on Seinfeld, he and I wrote an op-ed saying, this is the one thing you left out of disability, in Hollywood. And he agreed. And I criticized many, many different films and got into many fights in Hollywood.
How did you make your voice heard in Hollywood in the first place?
Because I spoke to the press, I wrote op-eds, I was very critical. Controversy sells, and I can get into that later regarding anti-Semitism if you want, because I have very strong views about that. But I think that controversy sells. And we were an outside organization. I didn't have anything to lose because I wasn't an investor in the film industry. And we were taken seriously because we were known as a disability rights organization, so that when we would speak to the press, we were speaking with authority. And that was the controversy.
How did you develop this authority?
Decades of supporting programs and writing white papers. I mean, I would describe my work as, yes, my day job is philanthropy, but really I was focusing most of my time on activism. I'll give you an example. Dwayne Johnson makes a film called Skyscraper, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's about a skyscraper in Hong Kong, and he's someone who's an amputee, and he plays this role and he saves the building and the people inside the building. And I had written to NBC right before it came out and said, oh, by the way, did you interview amputees for this role? And they came back to us and they said, what would you like? And I said, I'd like Dwayne Johnson to do an interview calling for the inclusion of people with disabilities and mentioning the role of the foundation, because I wanted to elevate our status as being able to speak out on this role. And he did it. And obviously it was written for him, by him, by, his company. I happen to know actors who are amputees. But, Hollywood needs star power. I understand. But what I got out of that was more recognition of our role of being able to speak out. So that was my strategy. And by the way, we received a lot of backlash because within the disability community, they're like, you're not a purist. You're not simply coming out against this movie. You're actually working with them. But I thought Dwayne Johnson is the highest paid and most recognized star in Hollywood. By him saying disability inclusion is something important that we need to work on was a win.
Wait, what did they expect you to do?
Who's they?
The people who criticized you.
So there's a purist view in activism. And the purist view is never deviate from what you are advocating for. You're against this film, be against this film, say you're against this film, and that's it. Don't work with them. And that's where the switch comes. And that's what I talk about in the book. At some point, you have to make the switch from being the gadfly, the guy that's calling out what the industry is doing wrong, to actually working with them to try to fix it. And so that we were able to, at some point, work with the major studios, Universal, Sony, some of the other major studios, to change their policy on opening their auditions to people with disabilities. And we're seeing more and more television shows and movies that have people with disabilities who are seen on screen, which is extremely empowering to people with disabilities. That took time. These studios don't work on a dime. It happened over a number of years. And I also had to be involved in creating a community because my ins to Hollywood were very limited. But I started to meet allies who were very connected in the industry, who really, truly believe this. One of my greatest allies is Peter Farrelly, who's an Academy Award-winning director He directed Green Book, but he's probably better known for his comedies like Dumb and Dumber and Something About Mary. And, Peter believes very strongly in this issue. He grew up in Rhode Island. One of his best friends was a quadriplegic. He's actually he passed away, but he's in many of Peter's movies. And Peter believes strongly about this. Now, Peter can call up the head of Universal, the head of Sony, and say, listen, this is the right thing to do. And we were able to have those conversations to actually change policy. That's what has to happen in order to create real change. Okay? For me, just to consistently come out against movies and TV shows and saying, listen, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, would not actually move the needle.
You did mention that, you work as a philanthropist and you have the backing of your foundation. I want to ask you, what do you think is the interplay between activism and philanthropy? To what extent one feeds the other?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say the book was written to sort of not emphasize philanthropy, because most philanthropists are not activists. I mean, some of them are. I mean, you could look at Bill Gates and you could say, is he an activist? Yes, I think he's an activist because he has a foundation, but he's also out there speaking about it. And he's actively involved in the issues that he cares about. But most foundations support activism. What I'm talking about as a head of a foundation is to become the activist, to put yourself out there, to have your name out there associated with the activism. That's fairly unusual in philanthropy. But the book is written not towards philanthropists, but for anyone, no matter how old they are, whatever their station. And I give examples of many different activists, some of whom are very young, 10 years old, teenagers, who got involved in helping to change the water system in Flint, Michigan, who got involved in promoting veganism and, met with the Pope and met with Sir Paul McCartney. So you don't have to have money. You have to have a skill to be able to get your voice out there and to make the connections that actually create change.
You write in the book that you didn't choose the cause chose you. How did you get into disability rights in the first place?
So our first project was with the Jewish Federation in Boston. We got involved with several other funders to improve Jewish education in the greater Boston area. The other funders were very clear about what they wanted to do. We were looking and working with the Federation of what is missing. And what was missing was children with disabilities did not have access to Jewish education. So that's where we first got involved. But there's a personal connection. My father, who's passed away almost 15 years ago, developed a debilitating disease called alpha-1 antitrypsin, which he gradually lost his lung capacity and where his mobility was extremely confined. My son has ADHD. I've dealt with issues of depression over my life. There's so many different connections to disability in my family and also every family out there. They say that 20 to 25% of Americans have some form of a disability. So it's such a widespread part of society. The problem within the disability community is people tend to identify with their disability, meaning I'm blind, I'm deaf, I have cerebral palsy, whatever it is. I have autism. They don't see they're all part of a whole. If the disability community bound together and said, we're all working together, they'd be the most powerful force in America.
So there's still controversy on what counts as disability?
I don't know if that's how I would phrase it. I would phrase it that the community has not completely come together to maximize their impact.
I want to ask you whether you think there's a thing called Jewish activism. Is there anything Jewish about your activism?
So everything about me is Jewish. My belief system, my belief in God, what I'm doing. I think that tikkun olam, giving back, trying to make society better is part of Jewish values. People interpret their Judaism differently. I mean, we're seeing this play out in real life, in the political world. Do you support Israel? Do you not support Israel? Amongst Jews. So I think there's very different views of what Jewish activism means. But for me, it's a belief in God. It's a belief in trying to get involved in areas where you can actually help move the needle, helping societies that need help without speaking for them. Because, I don't believe that you should speak for a society that you're not part of.
But do you, for example, collaborating with other Jewish activists is something that you see as beneficial as opposed to non-Jewish activists, or that it doesn't matter at all?
So this is a very, very, very good and personal question at this time in my life. Things have changed for me a great deal, and I'm struggling with it almost on a daily basis. Because for a long time, I was part of grand coalitions of people that cared about disability rights, about how disability is seen in the entertainment community. What I'm getting recently is people saying, I don't want to work with you. And it comes out in many different forms. It comes out in a conference that we were supposed to be part of, saying, we can't work with your organization because you're too political. It comes out in a very famous actress that we offered an award to regarding the issue of mental health and the success that the actress has had on mental health. And her accepting the award, but then coming back a little while later and saying, I can't accept this award because of what's going on in the Persian Gulf. And I'm like thinking to myself, what do I have to do with the Persian Gulf? Okay, I'm an American Jew. I'm an Israeli. There's a war going on in the Persian Gulf. But let's say I'm in Boston. I'm Christian. I don't have any connection to any other country. Would the same actress say, you as a Christian, as an American, because your president is President Trump, I can't accept an award from you because, your president is involved in the Persian Gulf? That would not happen. Okay, there's a latent or sometimes blatant anti-Semitism that's out there that I encounter every single day.
Did you say that to her? What have I got to do with the Persian Gulf?
We requested a phone call that was not accepted. They just didn't get back to us. Now, as a few years ago, I may have fought this in the press and gone out there and said, and called her out and made an issue and stuff like that. At this point in time, I don't know if that's worth it. But I get called out all the time. The BDS movement, and I don't know if people know what BDS is, the boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel. The BDS movement in Boston is one of the most radical BDS movements in the country. In fact, so radical that when they did a project called the Mapping Project, where they mapped every single politician, police force, university, philanthropist, they made me one of the poster childs of supporting genocide in Palestine. And that happens to me all the time. A couple weeks ago, there was a list put together of the top 100 people that are promoting genocide. So I'm constantly being attacked for this. And even more hurtful, I have a young activist who I approached and I said, listen, would you mind doing a blurb to your community about the book? I think it would help, let people know you're an activist. And she came back to me and she said, I'm really not comfortable doing this. I'm not comfortable connecting to you. I'm not comfortable connecting to your organization because I'm going to receive a lot of hate. And I'm afraid as I walk on the street, someone's going to attack me. And, my response is like, hey, don't do anything that you're not comfortable with. But I said to her, you can't hide from your Judaism. And she's like, well, I'm trying. I took off my Magen David. I had a chai. People started to realize what the chai was. I took the chai off. Her activism doesn't have to do with something in the Jewish community. And I'm like, first of all, you can't hide from your Judaism. Second of all, you can't convince the anti-Semites. You can't. They're going to hate you no matter how much you hide from your Judaism. And she made another comment to me saying, like, listen, I'm in New York, with Mamdani, the atmosphere is not great. I think I might be in danger. And that is what we're seeing happen in real time. Okay? And it happens to be that one of my trustees lives in New York City. And I spoke to her about this, and she's like, listen, my son, my husband walk with a kippah. It's concerning. It's concerning. And we've seen it happen all over the world. Rhetoric used improperly. And I'm all about being respectful in your activism, being accurate, and not promoting violence. But what we're seeing in the public sphere is the promotion of violence in the name of activism. That's not activism. That's intimidation. That's trying to take a whole people and saying, we are going after you for who you are, and we're going to separate you from your connection to your historical homeland because we have a belief that it's not your homeland and you're occupying someone else's land, and we're going to attack you because of who you are. And that is the society that I am living in, and I feel it every single week. And it's demoralizing.
So I've got two questions about that. One, how did you deal with this problem before? I mean, there's, anti-Semites have always been there. You have always been a proudly Jewish foundation, giving money to Jewish causes. How did you deal with it before? And I'm assuming that some time ago it was easier than it is now. That's what I'm getting from what you're saying. The other question is, what lessons are there to be learned from your activism about countering that? All you said about speaking out, making, creating alliances and networks and stuff like that. Where do you see, implementing the lessons that you've learned over the years in addressing this current problem?
So things change after October 7th. Pre-October 7th, I never encountered this. I was proudly Jewish. I was identified with Israel. No one ever said, I don't want to work with you because you're Jewish. All of a sudden, it happens over and over and over again. I'm also Israeli. I have an office in Israel. But I don't represent the Israeli government. I'm not involved in Israeli politics. It's like saying to an American, you're responsible for the policy of Donald Trump. No American would think that. They'd be like, oh, I'm against Donald Trump. What do I have to do with him? But automatically, Jews and Israelis are tied into anything that happens in this region. And also, I would say there's an obsession about what happens here. I don't know why. You tell me. Like, why do people care about a small country compared to the rest of the world that has so much attention on it? I'll tell you why I think people do. But why do you think that is? Why is there this obsession with Israel?
I think it is because Israel has played such a huge part in domestic American politics for so long. And it's a platform for people, sort of like a vessel for them to express their own ideas domestically. So just like if mainstream politicians, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, aligned with Israel and expressed their solidarity with Israel, and these people, citizens, wanted to come across as radical and put themselves in opposition to mainstream politics, the most effective way to do it was to come out against this one major issue. That's my assessment.
Okay, but it doesn't explain how anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment is so large in a country like Ireland that has almost no Jews and no Jewish or Spain. I mean, my personal view is anti-Semitism has always been part of our lives, will always be part of our lives. And sometimes it's not in vogue. I mean, I happen to have grown up in a time where there was not a lot of anti-Semitism. And it was almost like, during the years of like Seinfeld, it was great. Connect with the Jews because the Jews are, stable,
funny,
stress education, cool. All of a sudden, anti-Semitism has surged to the forefront. And I think there's a reason for it. I think people believe in conspiracy theories. It's a huge part of our society. I think Jews are part of that they believe that the Jews have a role, in all of these controversies. And I think that it has to do with monetization. I think that people who are out there selling their own product that need to raise their own money, like a Tucker Carlson, a Candace Owens, a Megyn Kelly, or whoever, they monetize anti-Semitism. It gets them more clicks, it gets them more views, it makes them more money. In politics, it also gets more attention, and people play with it on the left and the right. But it has real-time implications because what happens is once in a while, someone picks up a gun, and as we all know, guns are readily available in America, and a lot of people have them. They pick up a gun, they walk to a synagogue, to a Jewish school, to whatever, in Canada, in the United States, around the world, whatever, and they just start shooting and people get killed. I grew up in a time we didn't see this violence. I mean, the Tree of Life Synagogue was the first time in many, 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 many years that there was actually physical violence where Jews were killed.
That was just over a decade ago, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's happening all the time. It's becoming normalized.
But I want to go back to what you said about an American being accused for Trump's policies, and to tie it back to my question from before. Why aren't you saying that? I mean, just because I'm Jewish, don't hold me accountable for certainly what Israel does, but also for what you may think, rightly or wrongly, that the Jews are doing. I'm just, doing my thing. Judge me based on my merits, on what I say about disability.
So sometimes we do take a position. I have sued organizations because they've come out and said, well, we can't work with you because of the genocide of the Palestinian people and the rights of the native people of the lands of Palestine. I have sued organizations. Sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes I'm not successful. And sometimes there's a big cost, and I have to weigh, whether the cost is worth it or not. I will tell you my experience is the other side, while they may not be Jewish, the people representing them are always Jewish. So, there are...
You mean even your detractors?
The detractors and the people that are defending the detractors.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that this conservative movement, and we're seeing this lately play out in the public sphere. Okay, this trying to move Jews away from Israel. And I gave you the example of that young activist who said, I'm not comfortable being close. It's working. It's working. Younger Jews don't feel comfortable with Israel because they're believing all of the rhetoric that they're being. And by the way, the people who are saying this, they know exactly what they're saying. They know exactly why they're saying that.
But the Jews who believe that cannot be accused of anti-Semitism, right? They come from a different place. I mean, you're saying that a lot of the conspiracy theories regarding Israel come from deeply embedded anti-Semitic sentiments. You cannot say that about young Jews who disavow Israel.
No, but I think what's being happened is they're made to feel uncomfortable being, one, pro-Israel, and two, showing their Judaism.
But that's fine, isn't it? I mean, you can have a difference of opinions on Israel.
Sure, you can have difference of opinions, but when you make a whole sector of society feel uncomfortable or you create division, okay, when you call a certain group of supporters of Israel monsters, that's a trigger. That's a trigger, and it's sending a message out there saying they are the enemy of the American people. They are the enemy. Understanding the vast majority of American Jews still see Israel. They still understand the Torah. They still understand that the land of Israel is part of what being Jewish is about. Okay, but there's this effort of saying, oh, you can be Jewish. We have nothing problem, with Jewish. We'll go and hang out with the Satmarim because they're great. They look like Jews. They act like Jews, but they hate Israel. That's wonderful. And this whole thing like, oh, if I want to get ahead, if I want to be, a successful podcaster or influencer or politician, I have to disavow my people's connection to the land of Israel. That's what I'm seeing happening.
Mm-hmm. So it's become a lot more difficult to be Jewish American. Is it also much more difficult to the point that it's debilitating to be a Jewish American philanthropist and a Jewish American activist?
So someone gave me this analogy the other day, a story about a frog being put in a pot of water. And slowly the heat is turned up and it becomes a little bit more uncomfortable, a little bit more uncomfortable, a little bit more uncomfortable. And that's what it's like to be in America right now as a Jew. We know it's uncomfortable. We know that things are happening. We know that more, at least I know in liberal society, and I am a liberal. Okay, I still consider myself a liberal, but all of a sudden, there's this division of you are accepted. There are certain people that you are accepted in our camp, and there's certain people that you are not accepted in our camp. And Jews are not accepted unless they disavow all of their connections to Israel. Then they're accepted. But it feels like things are getting worse and worse and worse, but the water's not boiling to the point where we're like, we got to get out of here. Now, people are moving. America's 50 different states. And there is a huge movement of people moving from New York, from Massachusetts, from California, from certain states that they no longer feel comfortable, and going to other states that have large Jewish populations that feel more comfortable.
But what about your work as a philanthropist and an activist? Do you feel that it's been impacted?
Oh, sure. I think I'm much more selective about who I'm working with. And I think I really want to know them a lot more closely. And yes, it's about the issue and the alignment. But, one of the things I talk about in the book is know your no. You really have to trust, not only in philanthropy or activism, but in business in general, or human, relations in general. You have to trust the people you're working with. And if you don't trust them, move as far away from them as possible. And so my radar is way, way, way up there. And, choosing who I want to work with, I'm much more careful about that.
So yeah, you're American and you say that you are also Israeli. You have an office in Israel. What can you say about the transnational element in activism? When you take a cause and move it to a different country, like, does it require adapting it, or knowing the new environment, the new landscape, as well as you did in your home country? I mean, what does it require to travel across borders with activism?
I just think you have to know the country. Like, for example, we started an organization called Link 20. Link 20 meaning linking the 20% of the population that has a disability to society. And we were active both in Israel and the United States. So this group really did some transformative work. One, in Major League Baseball, for over 100 years, if you were injured playing baseball, you were put on the disabled list. This group contacted the Major League Baseball and said, you can't call it the disabled list because people are not permanently disabled. And very quickly, the commissioner of baseball changed it to the injured list. Now, after 100 years, now you're hurt in baseball, you're put on the injured list. That was something that we helped accomplish, and it happened very quickly because our partner, Major League Baseball, said, yeah, we get it. We're going to do it. Para-Olympians were paid a fraction of what Olympians were paid for medaling. This group, Link 20, got involved with them, and they were able to get parity on pay for medals for Paralympians and Olympians. That's a success. In Israel, also, there was a Link 20. They work with the transportation ministry to make the buses accessible for people with disabilities throughout the country. Because public transportation is much more important in Israel than it is in America, especially since a lot of America, people don't live in cities and there's not public transportation the same way there is. So yes, you have to look at cultural differences. You have to look at how the country operates. But by and large, a lot of the barriers that people face are the same. What gets addressed might be different.
All right. Jay Ruderman, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And also big thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app. And we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review, good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto a Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has way more than 1,000 interviews by now. Of course, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. But most important, join us again next time for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.